Yeah, we are. We're away. Corker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Apologies, we're running late, but if you're all ready, we'll get underway once Murray's circulated a few things. Welcome along on this sunny waimakariri day. I'm not sure what the temperature is out there, but it doesn't feel like October. Alrighty. Mr. Rubin, would you be so kind as to kick off with the karakia?
E tō mātou mātuturangi, kia tapu tō ingawa, kia tai mai tō rangatiratanga. Kia me te tau e pai ai ki rungu ki te whenua. Kia rite anō ki tō tarangi, ho mai kia mātou ai nei, he taro mo mātou mo tēnei rā. He muru o mātou hara, me mātou hoki e muru nei. I o te hune e harana kia mātou, i au hoki mātou e kawe ke whakawaia. E nari whakarangi a mātou e te kino, no hoki te rangatiratanga, te kaha me te kororea. Ake, ameni.
Thank you very much. Now, just a note that we're still working on an audio link for our meetings for the rest of the year, so please, members, and if there's any members of the public speaking, if we can use the microphones, please. Apologies. I have one from David Ashby. He's at a family funeral at the moment. He will try and join us a bit later on. One from Stephen Bragg.
And Tim Davey, seeking directions and apologies.
And Tim Davey. If I can have a mover, please, that those are accepted.
And John Cook, who's Crook.
Oh. And John Cook. Right.
I'll move
Judith,
that.
thank you. Seconder. Cam, thank you. And carried those. Rightio, we'll do some introductions to start off the day.
Erin Harvey, Community Representative. Judith Roper-Lindsay, Community Representative.
Sandra Stewart, Waimakariri District Councillor.
Wendy Main, Community Representative.
Caroline Latham, Community Representative.
Cam Henderson, Community Representative.
Arapata Rubin, Naitua Huriri Representative.
I'm Michael Blackwell, I'm Community Representative and the current Chair, and if we can pass the ball down to you, Robert, you can lead off down the back. Thank you, everyone. Behave. Do we have any changes to the Registrar of Interest?
Yeah, remove me as Chair of Te Naitua Huriri Runanga. Christchurch, West Melton? No, I've taken off that one too. Yeah.
He's still a rep, but does not chair.
Corker. Righto. Do we have any members of the public that would like to talk today? Michael, Robert? Do you guys want to do paper, rock, scissors to see who goes first?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Zone Committee. Firstly, apologies for gate crashing half an hour ago. I was a bit ahead of myself. Last week I was a bit late. I never got to the Oxford Range Committee, but never mind. Yeah, look, just a couple of things. Firstly, you've got good news and bad news. Good news is that in the last month there has been a lot of activity on our river frontage at vast expense, and the bad news is I've got a spring in my step because I've got a very much lighter pocket. About $80,000 it's cost. Long overdue. 27 years, in fact, it's taken me to persuade ECAN that, yes, there is a problem there. I first presented myself in front of the ECAN Council in 1995, and it's taken since then with many presentations and a whole gap of my time, my life, from 98 till 07 when I retired as a councillor. And during that period of time, the ECAN Rivers Department would not entertain the idea of doing river protection on my frontage because they deemed it would be perceived as being a conflict of interest. Now that was the thinking then. It was appalling. In the meantime, our family, have lost somewhere between 8 and 10 hectares, $250,000 worth of land. It took me hiring a lawyer, $10,000, to present myself to the ECAN Council a year ago to finally convince them that yes, they had a responsibility to actually do something. In previous presentations I'd made, and very disappointing, previous presentations I'd made, I get the letter back, we note that you're concerned about this, we note that you're concerned about the other thing, and we note one of those letters had 5 things that they noted, but did nothing. This time, a year ago, the then Chairman Stephen Lowndes, he directed Chief Executive Bayfield to actually action the problems that I'd outlined. And only then did things start to happen. It took 26 blooming years. Now it's 27 years and we've got something done. But we've lost a lot of land and it's cost a hell of a lot more, cost us a hell of a lot more than it would have. Which brings me on to the the next thing, your, what do you call it, your vegetation clearance from the Okuku to the confluence up to the gorge. Now, I don't know where that's at, except I was implored to get on and do the river protection before the end of June, so the frontage out in the middle of the river out from us could be done at the same time, or those funds can't be carried forward. I don't know what's happened to those funds, but then all of a sudden there was another $500,000 of funds arrived from shovel-ready stuff, inverted commas, we're told. You know more about it than me. But where that is in the time frame, I don't know. I'm told it was going to be in October, then I was told it was going to be November, then I was told it was going to be December. But would you, Robert, go and spend your money first? So I have. So I've got a clear expectation that that vegetation clearance out in the far side of the river from our frontage will be done. But when it'll be done, I don't know. So that's really my question to you people. Do you know? Have you been advised by ECAN as to when that might happen?
Thank you, Robert. I'm pleased to hear that you've got some good news. We'll embrace that. That's a good start. And I'll ask possibly Andrew, can you shed a bit of light on works program?
At the workshop earlier today I referred to the fact that we had the draft plan written out with all the steps. Oh, sorry. At the workshop this afternoon, I talked about the draft plan for as in the actions being taken on the Ashley Rakahuri. That is, I'm sorry, I'm only reading that on my phone. It was sent to me today. This work is clearly within that and is there. I wouldn't expect the Zone Committee to know the exact dates of that, but we'll find out and inform you of that simply because it's actually an operational matter. And whilst Robert has gone through his sequence of events, there's perhaps other elements in broader scheme of the COVID funding and things that are actually having an impact on this. But we can certainly find out the date and come back with a sort of confirmed date or range date for that work to be done. I have no reason whatsoever to doubt that the work will be being done in what I will term as being the near future. My understanding it's actually would have started by this side of Christmas, but that's I'd have to say is from conversations rather than actual fact. But there's nothing I've been made aware of that says there's any delay or any significant delay in the work to be done. But I can find out the date and come back to the Zone Committee.
Well, that's similar to what I've heard, is that, yes, it's been confirmed, but no date's been set, so that's why I asked the question.
Yep.
But assuming it all goes ahead at some point, could I make a further point that this won't be a one-off? Now, I'm told that it's COVID money, it's shovel-ready money. It's one-off type money. My point is that someone, somewhere, should be keeping their eye on the ball, making sure that there is future funding set aside or made available or whatever for the maintenance of that vegetation clearance. I know it's taken a long time to get to the mess it is now, but it won't stay like that. You only got to look at the Air Riverbed, and the can put their bulldozers into that on a regular basis to keep it clear. That's the only other point I'd make.
Right, Robert. Possibly that might be a thought you could put into ECAN's long-term plan.
Are you talking to me or to
We act, just for information, Mr. Chairman, because you weren't there, in discussing our priorities for the long-term plan. Actually, maintenance of flow through things like maintaining open channel was one of our priorities that we just identified in the workshop that we had this afternoon. Yeah.
The other point I'd make is that in the course of the works at home, it was pointed out to me that the bulldozer really wasn't allowed in the river for fear that it might make the water a bit muddy, but discoloration. Now, in the big scheme of things, that is just such a load of nonsense. It's not funny. Next week you could get 5 inches of rain and the Ashley will be a good flood. It won't be a raging torrent. You've got to get 8 inches of rain to get a decent flood. But if you can't do some river protection works on the one hand and put the bulldozer into some water and make the thing discoloured on the other, well then it's a contradiction of terms. That's the only other point I'd make. Somebody somewhere has got to get some common sense.
Yeah. Well, I take your point, Robert, but council workers and contractors are obliged to try and mitigate any impact they have in the course of doing those works. So it is a frustrating framework, but it does take precedence.
Well, it's a nonsense. It's an absolute nonsense.
They do say the law is an arse, but it's still the law.
And a retired judge once said, if the law's an ass, change the law.
Thanks, Rob. Just if we could just note, Mr. David Ashby has rushed to join us. Caroline.
just got a question for Robert. So, Robert, what have you, because I've had a look at your riverbank there, and I'm just interested to know what you've done and what you're now expecting ECAN to do. Because I don't know the details of that.
Well, there were two parts to our problem. I don't know if you can remember the site of the old house that got, yeah, well, the works that were done upstream of there, there's still major problem below that old house site with the high cliffs, those 50-foot high cliffs. No work's been done there. We've concentrated our efforts where the river changed its flow and it came in like a great big fishhook. And they've put in these, they've got a name for them too, and it escapes me. They dig a hole, dig a trench, anchor a concrete block with a wire rope, and then put in some greenery, some willows that are all lashed together. And then another one half a chain down, and then in between that, put in rock. So there's nearly 600 tonne of rock been brought in. And they're good rocks too. They're half the size of this table or bigger. They're not pebbles that'll float away. So there's a lot of rock gone in these rock groins in between these plantings, which are anchored with a dead man away back in the paddock and wire ropes. It's actually, I'm very impressed because I hadn't seen this concept before or heard of it. And the David Owen and Fred Brooks, or David's behind the desk, I think, and Fred Brooks is the man organising it. They introduced this concept to me of the type of protection that they had in mind. And so I really took them on faith, and I'm glad I did, because I'm very impressed. I'm very impressed. So, yes, it's a lot of money. It's long overdue. We could have spent a lot less money 10 years ago. But anyway, that's history. We've done it now. We've got to hope and pray that what they've done is will survive the first test. And we haven't had a test in that river since the end of July 17. That very terrible bad Friday. I remember it well. So, and then further up, they have put in a couple of shingle banks, and Fred Brooks proudly said, "Robert, I'll put you in the truck and come and show you the Johnston Memorial Wall." Cheeky bugger. Anyway, they're there to help. I don't know how long they'll last, because that river in full fury can be vicious. So, for the first time in the zone's history of my attendance, I've got a smile on my face.
Thank you very much. Michael, do you want to?
Yeah. Right at the top, Murray. Yep. Today I'm going to talk about the cam from Northbrook Road down. There's virtually no weed in the river at all. Okay, no mechanical thing done there at all. It's all planted. There's a good K there of plants everywhere, all native plants. Not a bit of weed in the river. Never saw a bully, never saw an eel, never saw a trout. There's virtually no biodiversity in it at all. Next one please, Murray. This is a close-up of it. Same as the Taranaki stream. Just rolling sand and sediment and rotten vegetation. Next one please, Murray. All nicely planted. Again, no weed. Why? Why can't we do something about it? The nutrients, if there's nitrates in the water, that should be prolific weed. Should be smothered in weed, not no weed. Next one please, Murray. That there has had a tree pulled out on that one in the last 12 months. Next one please, Murray. Same scenario. Next one. And this is at Bramley's Bridge. I'm sorry about the glare on the water, but the sun wasn't out the day I was there. But you can see patches of oxygen weed growing in the water. Next one please, Murray. That's a close-up of it. How can we get it to grow there, when we can't get it to grow further up the camp? Next one please. This is at Rebels Road. Very little weed in the water. It's been like that for 2 years. A very slight improvement last summer. Why? There's nothing else will kill that but chemicals, unless it's been mechanically dug out. I'm sick to death coming here all the time, showing you things and nothing ever happens. Next one please, Murray. That's further down the cam. There's a wee tiny bit of weed. And if you scoop in the weed, there is the odd shrimp there, an odd bully. Carry on, Murray. That should be full of weed. Nothing. Next one. Just go down the river, it just gets no bedding. You can see a wee bit of weed. See that sand and rolling? The same scenario everywhere you go. Next one. Just bare mud. You go there at night, there's hardly a bully. Virtually no biodiversity at all. Next one. That's behind the mill. 2016, it was full of weed. Next one please, Murray. Now this is over at the Courtney stream. Not a bit of weed in it. There used to be willow trees there. Next one please. That's what it was like before the trees were cut out. The trees were taken out about 2 years ago. Not a bit of weed in the thing. You go upstream. Next one please, Murray. This is the same stream further up. This is what it should look like. Grass growing out on the water, making cover for our biodiversity. I'm not saying the water's perfect, because it won't be. The nitrates will be up in it. But that's what our stream should look like. The cam should look like that. Next one please. This is further up. See the watercress, 6 foot wide. This was only taken 2 weeks ago. This is what the cam should look like. This is what all our streams should be looking like. I'm too scared to tell you because it'll disappear. It's up the Courtney stream, right up the top, Greg's Road. Next one please. That's a close up of the watercress. Healthy. Next one please, Murray. That's oxygen weed in the water and other weeds. Virtually 100% weed. Now, this is a shocker. This is the Botanical Gardens. Right in the middle of the Botanical Gardens, the middle bridge. Not a bit of weed in it. Nothing. I know someone's done a survey on fish life and the trout and eels are down low in numbers. I don't know who done it because I heard the public talking about it. Next one, please. That's just off the bridge. Just walking to go to see a specialist at the bloody hospital, and this is what you come up against. Next one. Another view look. What annoys me, there's no life there. I couldn't find a bully or nothing. I did see 2 trout and 1 eel in the places I looked. Next one, please, Murray. Now this is at Fennelton Road, right on the edge of the road. Only 2 k's upstream, maybe 2.5 k's. 100% weed. You know what I mean? Downstream should be similar. What's going on? Why can't we get to the bottom of it? I know this is not in our district, but this is just an example to show you. Now this is how prolific the trout used to be. This was in about the 1960s, early 60s. This is one pool in the Selwyn River that when it dried up. Now you'd be lucky if you saw one there. I want the zone committee to get someone to look into this and get to the bottom of it. I'm sick of them saying it's just sediment stopping the weed from growing, because that's blatantly not true. These rivers have been here for millions of years, and they've put up with a hell of a lot of sediment over that time. Any questions?
Linda.
Michael, I'm just wondering, my recent experience in Oxford is a very tidy gardener neighbour of mine who was spraying out the ditch in front of her property with weed killer. Now, in my previous life, the one thing I did come across was the synergistic effect of toxins on plants and animals in water. And you don't need a toxic amount of weed killer, of copper, of zinc, but if you have just a micro amount of each one, the combined effect is going to give you a kill. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if one of the reasons that the authorities are up against is they can't control my tidy neighbour. And the runoff from so many small streams feeding into these bigger rivers may just be collecting minute quantities of various things that would kill off the plants. And what is needed is a public information campaign as much as an investigation. I guess from your information you must have been able to track back the confluence of rivers that are dirty, or rather the confluence of rivers or streams that have got life in them with those where it's completely gone.
It's not completely gone.
But okay, damaged.
Only 1 or 2% left what should be there.
Yes.
A lot of drains run out. You can see where they run out. They kill the weed for about 1 metre out for about 20 metres, and then it gets diluted enough it doesn't kill the weed.
Yeah.
But to kill the whole river, it's not going to run out of one drain.
But can you identify where those harmful substances are actually entering the river?
In some places you can see where it stops and starts. And the river's perfect and nothing, and there's no drain running in it.
Then that
And the Hall's
surely
one of
is
them.
where the authorities ought to be looking towards speaking to these people.
The Hall's pool's been running brown for 3 years. The weed comes back in the summertime a bit, then by the midwinter, down to bare mud. And then it rolls. It's had hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of plants go out in there. Been there for 15 years, some of them. I mean hundreds of thousands of dollars, miles of it. Made no difference to the river whatsoever.
No, I can appreciate that.
Sorry.
No, I'm just trying to think, cheaper solutions than having a big investigation which is requiring budget money.
At the end of the day, what do we think of our environment? If we're not prepared to spend a bit of money on it, test the sediment in the bottom of them and find out what's in it. Not rocket science.
Well, I think the other thing that needs to be put forward is the biodiversity in the water is an indicator of the overall health of the water,
Yep.
which is ultimately what we're drinking.
Mm-hmm. Another one is the Capitone stream. About 4 k's of it, not a bit of weed in it.
That's behind Belfast, Michael?
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
And there's a big pond in there between the two, the Styx River and the Capitone stream. It's about 200 metres long, or about 100 metres wide. Not a bit of weed in it. Another indication there's hundreds and hundreds of native trees planted all around it. Been there for 10, 15 years. No weed. The water running into it, the creek's running into it. No weed in them.
Thank you, Michael. Mr. Chair, I wonder if we could ask Adrian at the next meeting to give us a presentation on just weed habitat requirements in rivers. You know, I'm conscious that with all the sediment, I mean, one of the reasons for doing sediment trapping is to actually give the native weed things to hold on to. You know, physically, not to get washed away and in sediment that moves. You know, there are certain habitat requirements. So just perhaps a short briefing on good weeds, bad weeds, and why we don't have weeds in our waterways.
Well, it's aquatic plant life, that's what we need. I don't care what sort of plant life it is, as long as it's
Well,
growing.
that's what I'm saying, yeah. Just why isn't anything growing? Even the baddies.
Yep, no, take that on board. Thank you.
That
So-
Rebels Road and the Cam and behind Tuahiwi, those good pictures I showed you, that's what the Cam used to be like when I was a kid. It used to grow right across. Now there's none there. And it's not farming causing it, I'll tell you that now.
Sophie, have you got any thoughts you want to put forward at short notice?
I think it'd be quite good to actually map the areas where you're seeing the weed beds dying off, and yeah, just looking at overlaying with management. If there's, you know, it could be multiple factors, but you know, there could be patterns that could emerge from that.
Most of the areas, ECAN have got control of them, not the Waimak District Council, where it's bad.
Yeah, so it could be maybe support from ECAN to map what you're seeing, or WDC. Is it?
Yeah.
Student project.
Good student project, yeah. So just thinking about, or is it something? I mean, obviously we could, you know, with a highlighter, you can also just take a map of the district and highlight it. That could be.
Sophie, I do believe most of it's been mapped right down to as far as Rebels Road, through all that Cam River rehabilitation work that's been done for the last 20 years. It's been well mapped. It's well known what the issues are. We actually got a plan in place, but no one's implementing it. That's the big problem. So my question is not to Michael, it's actually to the council and Environment Canterbury. Just get on and do it. Otherwise we're just rehashing old stuff. Yeah. Sorry, Sandra. Yeah.
Sandra?
Yes, you're right. The CAM fund has yet to spend any money. It's been sitting there for 20 years. We can't do anything in stream because we're waiting on the ECAN consent. I'm having an update on where that is this week. And so until we get the tick off to do any of that work, which involves many sediment traps in the brooks and not down to the main stem, not below Bramley's but upstream. I mean, I have an answer for you. Until the work's done, and we won't see any results on the sediment, and that's to tackle the sediment. I mean, as Michael correctly identifies, there's a lot of planting, but that really deals to across ground runoff and trying to filter that out. But it doesn't deal with critical source areas where sediment is pouring in. And there is a lot of, as Henry Hudson identified, hundreds if not thousands of tonnes of legacy sediment sitting in those brooks and that river. having an answer for why some of it is growing weed even under those conditions and others aren't, and it would be good to map the areas and see whether they change at various times of the year. Certainly welcome that, but you know, as far as spending any money as yet, still waiting on a consent.
With the increase, sorry,
No, go on, Mark.
with the increase of nitrates in the water, there's 0.9, there's a wee bit. No.
Well, God knows. Let's not hold our breath.
Well, I sent a letter to Environment. Sent an email to Environment Canterbury 4 weeks ago now on the Heathcote River, and no reply yet. Just accept they say they've received it. Now that's the worst of the lot. And that's got more planting than anything else. The nitrates in there are about 3.8 to 4. It should be prolific aquatic weed life in there. It used to be when I fished it.
No,
Like farming, you put more nitrates on, or more fertiliser on, the more grass you grow. Same in the water, until it gets too thick and it kills it, like a treatment plant.
Andrew, did you want to add? Please come up and use the microphone. Yep, now's a good time.
First one actually addresses, so in regards to the consent, we were asked at the last committee meeting to give an update on where that was at. We looked into that. The response has been supplied. The reality is the consent has gone back and forth. And as I understood of when I was updated, it was the ball wasn't in our court, but I don't think that consent is very far off being granted at the moment. So it has actually gone back and forth within a period of time, so it's not all with Environment Canterbury. I know I've just got the update about what it was, and it's information from both sides providing information or not providing information that's actually delayed that process. And then the other one, which Robert's not here, but I'll make sure I update there, is that regarding that work in the upper Ashley, so the COVID funding that came through, the process then is that the government supplies a letter to us to confirm that. Has just been received. Within the next 30 days, they supply a contract for that work to be done. That means we can then start our procurement process, which we have to abide by. That takes a couple of months, so all of a sudden you're at Christmas. They would then be evaluated. It may be before Christmas, but let's say it's in January, which would actually see that it's sort of that mid-February, March before the work starts. So that process there that we're talking about is central government process followed by a procurement process that we have to go through, just like all councils do for every process. So that's the update that I can give on that, and I'll make sure that Robert gets to hear that.
Right. Coming back to the degraded state of our lowland waterways, I agree with you, Michael. The photos that you present each month, when you can, are the greatest illustration of what we're trying to correct. And it's abhorrent, the condition that we're looking at. And look, there is no single answer, but...
Yeah, well, I've been fishing for 55 years. I've spent my whole life on waterways. And I won't even buy a licence now.
No, and there's a lot of others
and I'll
in
tell
the same
you
boat.
One thing, you dig a hole to catch a sediment. It's not going to fix it because that's not the problem.
No.
Sediment's not the problem.
It's a problem, but not the sole problem.
It's only a problem because there's no aquatic weed in the river. Aquatic weed in the river catches the sediment, and the weed grows through it, and it builds up and builds up.
Yep. All right, any further questions of Michael? Oh, Cam.
Sorry, just one, Michael. You quite often present photos of situations outside of our zone, predominantly in the Christchurch area. Do you also present this to the Christchurch West Melton Zone Committee?
No.
Is that an option?
Once a month here is enough for me. Otherwise,
fair enough.
I don't mind doing it. It's not a problem. But I want to see something constructive done. It doesn't have to be a lot of money to fix these things. We've got to use a bit of common sense. You drive around all around Canterbury, half the drains are all sprayed. It's not doing the biodiversity any good.
So with regard to your spraying, it comes back to Linda's point, which she's quite correct. It's how do you stop your neighbour doing what they think is their right. So we come back to behavioural change and education, and that's not a fast process.
Personally, I think any drain or any ditch or any creek that's got water in it should be controlled by one body, with input from councils and farmers. And you're not allowed to touch that drain unless you get the okay to do so. That's the only way to stop it. I know it's more bloody red tape and more rubbish, but if we can't trust people to look after our waterways, that's what we're going to have to do to fix them.
Robert?
Could I make a comment on that subject? You're probably quite right that you can't trust people to look after their drains sensibly. In the early 90s, the Oxford Rural Drain Network was a shambles, and the former Mayor Janice Skerr asked me to lead the formation of an Oxford Rural Drainage Committee, which I did, and that has been, and we set up a new rating district, which was widely supported by the community, where the drainage network is. There's two. There's one up near Hugh Hill, Pipps Creek, and one around the foothills of Oxford. That has been a huge success, and no one's allowed to touch those drains without the approval of the Oxford Drainage Committee. And the Drainage Committee do it, and it's paid for by this rate, a drainage rate.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some that are designated within the scheme, and they're only in the scheme because we don't want anyone to touch them. Because to touch them will accelerate erosion and the sediment that goes downstream. So it can be done, but my view is that the Waimakariri Council had a new improved, or a seminar on the new improved ways of managing the rural drains, and one of them was to leave them alone and let nature take its course. Well, unfortunately that won't happen. That's not the solution. At some point you're better to actually manually or physically clean them out, but spraying is not the answer, in my view.
Thank you, Robert. Anything else, Michael?
No, I think I've said enough today, thank you.
No, look, we appreciate your time and your comments, sir. Keep up the good work.
Yep.
Rightio. Item 3. Zipporah, would you like to make a small presentation, please?
To present, but before I launch into that, I thought I'd just give you a 3-second update on the last time we allocated funding. We allocated funding towards 3 wetlands, and within the last 2 weeks we've had contractors out on the ground beginning those works because it's now spring and that can happen. So that's so the money we allocated last time, things are starting to move with those projects, which is very exciting. So all the paperwork's out of the way. So of this financial year, we've allocated 8.5k towards the Ald wetland, which is one of the wetlands down by Kaiapoi, and the rest is currently unallocated, and I'm proposing we allocate 10k of that towards the project I'm about to present. I was hoping to have another project, it was all scoped up, and then the MPS landed, and we're still deciding whether the way we'd scoped it now meets the new wetland rules or not. So we'll hopefully have that to you next meeting, once we've done a bit more head scratching and walking around it and figuring out where fences go. So this project is an air well. It's one of the largest remaining Kanuka remnants on the plains. So you can see it just there. It's up from the waimakariri, and it's about 13 hectares. It has had some historic bulldozing through it. You can see those nice straight lines that nature grows, and that was probably done for sheep shelter, which apparently was the done thing back in the day. But this Kanuka remnant would have been quite representative of what was originally in this area, so it's quite special. It's got obviously the Kanuka, that's the sort of keystone species, but it has a whole suite of underground mosses along the ground. It's got a couple of orchid species, Cumulus, yeah, and a whole lot of other really rare and exciting species. Some of them are quite pretty, and some of them you do have to kind of get down on your hands and knees and forage around, but to have so many native species, you know, surrounded by such high productive land that's been persisting there is really exciting. And it also, we've done a botanical survey. We haven't done insects and lizards, but we suspect that all the plant species have been there, and they've been there, they've never been lost, so we suspect it is also supporting all the associated other parts of that ecosystem. I got asked about if we'd done a fungi species today. We haven't looked at fungi, but apparently Kanuka remnants have some of the highest diversity of fungi as an ecosystem type. So like I said, this project is asking for $10K and $6, and that will be matched by DOC with slightly more. So it's the Kanuka remnant's quite invaded by both gorse and broom, and that's an issue because they fix nitrogen, and these are dryland remnants that have traditionally very low nutrients, and so by fixing that nitrogen they allow other exotic species in. And the other issue is cotsfoot, which is an exotic grass, and it responds really well to a bit of extra irrigation and a bit of extra nutrients. So the weed control will focus on gorse, broom and cotsfoot control. So some selective spraying and cutting and pasting. And we've also had a lot of success in another Kanuka remnant bulldozing around the outside. So we'll do a scrape alongside this one to see whether we can start growing that remnant out again. Yeah, so that was a short one today. And that's all I have. Is there any questions?
Just a question about the irrigation. It does have irrigation right around it. Does this block get irrigated?
No, so it's not. It doesn't get irrigated on. Part of the coltsfoot issue is water moving along the ground. So they are looking at trialling, sort of digging a ditch and putting it rocks and see if we can get that to dive rather than go across. Yeah, so it's not irrigated on, but it is still impacted. Yeah.
Can I ask, how tall does this remnant stand?
So they form, this particular species of Kanuka does form a closed canopy cover at about 4 metres in this situation. Yeah. Yeah, so you get the canopy cover of Kanuka, and then you get some of the other shrubs growing underneath it, and then under that you get the herbs and the orchids and things like that.
So how old would that be to get to that kind of popcorn? It's just
Yes. It is replacing itself, so the trees themselves, I can't answer that, but I wouldn't expect they'd be hundreds of years old. But yeah, they need to have that continuous link to things being there. Yeah.
Sorry, one more question.
Yeah.
Ongoing maintenance. Obviously, this is a bit of a clean out, get rid of all the stuff we don't want.
Yes.
Ongoing maintenance. What's the plan there?
Yeah, so DOC will do ongoing monitoring of the site and ongoing maintenance to make sure that it doesn't get reinvaded. And once you get those, so The Cotsfoot and the Gorse and Broom is really in those lines where there's a lot of light, and so we're hoping once we get the recruitment and a bit of shade, that it'll eventually be a self-sustaining ecosystem that won't need a lot of weeding. Yeah.
Rightio. So we have a recommendation, that an allocation of $1,006. John, that $6 isn't for your coffee, is it?
10,000.
10,000,
Another
sorry.
zero in there.
Yeah, 10,000. Six. Where did you get the $6?
Oh, it was, so Doc did all the numbers, and so we were just, we got some contractors
That's
to quote
right,
us.
sorry.
Yeah. So that's
Let
what
me
it
start
is.
again.
Yeah.
An allocation of $10,006 of IMS funding for the Motu Kanuka Weed Control Project. Do I have a mover? Judith, seconder. Sandra, all those in favour? Any against? One against? You're against? You know, Caroline, thank you. Yep. Carried. Thank you very
Kia ora.
much.
Thank you all.
Would you, sorry? Yes, or you're welcome to.
Well, I mean, I obviously think that it looks like an awesome Kanuka shrubland and that it should be protected. But I guess my concern is mainly on principle, just in that we're providing 10% of our total annual IMS fund to Department of Conservation, a government department whose responsibility it is to protect biodiversity on DOC lands. 10 grand is a drop in the bucket of their weed and pest control budget, but it's a tenth of our whole fund. So, I just feel like DOC need to come to the party and do the work themselves so that we can use our fund for other community and private landowner projects that need a helping hand. That's my only objection. Yeah.
Can I just ask, is it on DOC land or is it on private
Yes,
land?
no,
it is,
sorry.
It is a DOC block in the middle of a private
so
farm.
when the dairy farm was sold, DOC, they did a subdivision, so that little block is now in DOC ownership as a scientific reserve. So DOC have purchased the land and put a new fence around it, but they're missing obviously a little bit of funding to do the initial weed control.
So chances are, if it had been sold, the centre pivot would be going straight through that whole area now. Yeah.
Great,
Very
thank
much.
you very much.
Rightio, item 4, the Macintosh Bend Rock Protection Update. Who's presenting that? Ian? Yeah, Ian, please come forward.
Excuse me, Murray, can we ask, I don't know if, I know some of the agree, if we can have an idea of those other IMS projects you're working with, even though they're not ready, just when we've got a funding like this, 10%, it would be nice to know what else was in the pipework in case we fund this and then something comes up that we would have liked to have used.
Absolutely. So we started the biodiversity subcommittee and we did have a general discussion around what is coming up and where it fits, but if you'd like that to come to the whole committee, then I'm open to that.
You know, it would be good for us all to know for these situations. Thank you.
Right, Ian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for the opportunity to come along today and talk about this project. It's a pretty key bit of flood protection infrastructure we need to improve on the Waimakariri River. I'll just use this. So you just push the button. Can I move it over to here? Okay. Yes, you can move it on. Thanks, Murray. I'll hold on to this. Be right. So, in essence, the goal of the presentation today is to explain what this particular project's about. Thank you. The need for the project, it's content and timing and look at the costs. We need to talk about the environmental and recreational effect management because it's a reasonably significant engineering job, and also to seek advice on community consultation needs and ideally get some zone committee support for the project. Thank you. So just to summarise the thing in a couple of slides, Macintosh's bend is a particularly sharp bend with exceptionally deep scour hole on the outside radius of it. There's a risk of riverbank and stopbank erosion during flood, and there's a greater risk of stopbank breach at Macintosh's Bend than elsewhere on the Waimakariri River at the moment, so it's really an issue we need to address. Kaipoi town and the rural surrounds and the oxidation ponds are all vulnerable in the event of breakout at that location. Thank you, Murray. And we're talking about a $3.2 million project. It's one of these shovel-ready projects that the government's been promoting, and so we've been working very hard to try to get it on the front foot and bring it forward, in essence, in terms of works program. Start in December and finish in July 2021, and we need to manage the work around recreational and activities, and public safety, of course, is a major priority as well. So that's the location of Macintosh's Bend or Macintosh's Rock or Rocks, or it's got a variety of different names. And it's one of the sharpest bends we've got on the Waimakariri River, and it's the narrowest point we've got on the Waimakariri River, so it's a real bottleneck. You go on from there, Murray, thanks. Looking a little bit at the big picture, the Waimakariri River catchment is a fairly large catchment, sourced in the Alps and very much dominated by nor'west rainfall patterns. They're the events that produce the floods in the Waimakariri. Thank you, Murray. And the river's been drained, in inverted commas, really ever since the 1870s. There's been a little bit of a battle going on. And you can see that top left-hand photo flooding through the square in Christchurch, essentially in 1868. 1927, that's what the riverbed looked like through that McLean's Island, Coots Island and Kaipoi Island area, and then the one below shows how it was altered over the period to 1988, much more confined with stop banks, and the breakouts in this direction to the north, down the old north branch of the Waimakariri were cut off with stop banks. Thank you, Murray. And that's the flood hazard that they were then and we still are trying to manage. So those are the potential breakout locations where the arrows are, and the orange indicates the potential flood areas if the river was to get out. And the orange lines there show the extent of our stop banking network. Up the Eyre River, the Cust and the Cam rivers, the Waimakariri and the Kaipoi, of course, as well. So focusing back on Macintosh's Bend, we have Ferry Road there coming down along the edge of the oxidation ponds. The stop banks are in orange again, and the thing that makes river engineers and probably anybody else that looks at that for a short time very nervous is the fact that we've got a very, very narrow berm area there at the end of Ferry Road, very narrow separation between the riverbank and the stop bank itself. And given that it's on a particularly sharp bend as well, there's a very high risk of the riverbank eroding, the berm eroding, the stop bank eroding, and floodwaters escaping. Thank you. In the 1960s, in the catchment board era, there was heavy rock armouring put along that riverbank. And here's a beautiful set of construction drawings that they had at the time. So that rock's largely still there, having been topped up over the years with flood damage and to some extent with the earthquake damage that occurred as well. But it's not the whole answer, unfortunately. And in more recent times, we
have looked at the bend much more closely. So we have cross sections that we survey at 5 yearly cycles on those red lines. So you can see 2 cross sections across the river there. Could you go forward one, please, Murray, and I'll come back. So that shows the cross sections plotted looking downstream with the stop bank, the bump on the left, coming across the berm down into the channel and up and over. So the one with the deepest bed level is the red line, and it's down to 9 metres below mean sea level. But if you compare it with the cross sections upstream and downstream of that location, they're only down about 3 to 4 metres below mean sea level. So it's there's a very deep scour hole on the outside of that bend. Could you go back again, please, Murray? Just back one. Yeah, that's right. So the other thing we did was riverbed soundings, and the area in blue there is the area where the scour hole is the deepest, right where the fishermen prefer to fish, I think. And that's deeper than -9. That's actually -12. That's 12 metres below mean sea level, compared to 3 metres below sea level upstream and downstream in the riverbed. So it's a very, very, very deep scour hole. Yeah, go on. Thanks, Murray. So this is what the site looks like in fair weather, with the fishermen and the fishing platform there, which is a key spot. So you can see the rock armouring along the riverbank. It's not quite as tidy as we'd like it to be. It's not going to perform quite as well as we'd like it to in a big flood event. If you go on just one more, Murray, and in behind the stop bank, that access track is also quite vulnerable to local scour and erosion, which could outflank the rock line from behind. So this is what the river looked like about half a metre below the peak in November 2018, which was a minor flood. It was really a minor flood in the scheme of things. But you can see the turbulence out there where the deep water is, and you can see how the water's jumping the rock line and moving quite fast even in behind it. The debris that's piled up there is against the fishing platform railing. You want to go on one more? So that's not a big flood. That's only half of our design flood in terms of flow. So there's a whole variety of things going on at McIntosh's Bend that you can see there on that list. Flood protection infrastructure, if you like, drainage outfalls, Feldwicks and McIntosh's, Kaipoi town, and behind it the oxidation ponds nearby, and then we come down into the other values, the regional park, the Pegasus Walkway, fishing, wetlands all around that area, and boating. Now this is a contour plan of that floodplain area. And Murray, could you point out McIntosh's Bend for us on there? So yeah, that's it, right on. So if the stop bank breaches there in a major flood, it could get in. It'll certainly get beyond the yellow and the orange, and it'll get into that purple. So it's beginning to affect the outskirts of Kaipoi. We're hopeful that if it got out there, it would be reasonably well contained in that bubble, but certainly there'll be localised flooding all around that bubble. Thank you. So what we are suggesting at this stage, and it's interim works in a sense, in that there'll still be longer term investigation work to do perhaps to try to deal with the sharpness of the bend and the depth of the scour hole, but in the interim we feel we can get huge gain by a combination of riverbank rock armour strengthening, making the access track behind that, along that riverbank, much more resilient to scour and erosion, and then going back to the red line there along the toe of the stop bank, placing a rock lining along the stop bank side slope and keying that into the ground 2 metres or so deep, so that there's much less likely of the stop bank getting washed out due to erosion. Yeah, perhaps before you go off that, Murray, we've worked particularly hard to try to sequence all of this work so that it has minimal effect on the people using the area, in particular the fishermen. And so if you can see the numbers there, number one is essentially at the end of Ferry Road there. We need to do some car park enhancement there to create more car parks during construction so that people can still park and use. We need to do a lot of localised fencing in that area so we can separate trucks and excavators from people. And over in the paddock, just to the left of Ferry Road there, we need to develop a site office and an area to stockpile rocks so that we can, the rocks coming in from Viewhall Quarry over at Oxford, it's about 70 kilometres away, so it'll have to be unloaded off the truck and trailers and then put on to off-road vehicles to cart down to site to place. So moving on to site number 2 is where that blue dashed line is on the left-hand side. That's an access track upgrade along the edge of that wetland. And then we move through to, gee whiz, it is a bit hard to see, isn't it? Some additional rock lining work in the orange there, which is just at the Kaipoi River confluence. And yeah, that's right. And then we move up to 3, which is stop bank rock armouring on the western side of Ferry Road. So that's number 3 there, Murray, on the red. No, up top. Next one up, that's right. And then number 4 is the same thing on the other side of Ferry Road. And then 5 is some of that blue, or 6 is some of that blue armouring work. Yeah, I've lost that. Number 6 there, 5 and 6 there, and then 7, 8 and 9 is where we were affecting the fishermen, and that's the area where we've taken care to avoid overlap with the fishing seasons on the one hand, and even when we do slightly overlap, we've got the ability for fishermen to go either downstream or upstream of that Ferry Road area. So essentially the fishing platform, the wheelchair platform that's there, is the pivot point for access either side. So you can go on from that now, Murray, I think. So the point I'm making really is that we've worked very, very hard to try to separate out our activities from the local recreational use. So that in essence summarises some of the key activities that I've just talked about. We're about 20,000 tonnes of graded rock that we need to bring in, and that comes in by truck and trailer from Oxford, as I said. So that's 27 tonne per truck and trailer load. So if you divide 27 into 20,000, that gives you a number. I'm not quite sure what that is. And one of the key elements of it is widening the access track over the stop bank so that we can have enough room to separate trucks from people and have a laneway for people to walk over. We need to allow access along a Pegasus walkway, cycleway, for as long as we can, and we can do that by putting the cycleway down into the adjoining paddock through the District Council land. Increase the Ferry Road car park area, as I mentioned before. And one of the little byproducts of what we're doing is, I notice at the moment that a lot of fishermen stand out on those rocks so they can get a better reach, and they're wobbling away there while they do that. Well, hopefully they'll wobble a little bit less, but we certainly wouldn't want to be encouraging them to do that. Go on there, Murray. And this is what the stop bank rock armouring looks like at the bottom, that sketch picture. So we're starting the rock armour layer about 1 metre from the top of the stop bank, coming down the side to berm level, and then we're keying in 2 metres below berm level. And we need to put a water barrier under that to reduce the seepage path and seepage through the stop bank, but it's mainly about erosion resistance. And another thing we've worked very hard on is trying to limit the amount of that work we need to do adjacent to the wetland areas. Thank you, Murray. And here's a picture of the rock lining. You can see in that wet area that certainly our track enhancement is going to be a big improvement for everybody. There again, we're working adjacent to wetlands in 1 or 2 locations in particular, and we've got to take care not to affect the water level controls in those wetlands. So maintain the ability for water to go in and out in the way that they've developed naturally. Thanks, Murray. And in terms of tree removal, we've got willow trees that are probably cracked willows. We need to remove from the rock armour riverbank in places. And also that particular tree we need to remove in order to widen the access ramp over the stop bank to allow that space we've talked about before. Yeah. And in terms of environmental works, we've talked about the weed willows. We need to do some flax planting along the edge of Jockeybaker Creek and the stop bank toe. We need to maintain the wetlands and improve or maintain the hydraulic connections, that's essential, and retain or relocate native trees, and by that I mean flaxes mainly, where we're disturbing them. We've allowed in the overall estimate of 3.2 million an $80,000 allowance for environmental enhancement, so we're open to offers as to how we could constructively use that money. And public safety is also very high. So just go through, I won't go through that list in detail, but it's about managing people in and around the car park, the walkway over the ramp to the fishing site, and also the walkway along the stop bank. Yeah. And you won't be able to read that, but it essentially shows the project broken down into its various activities and how it starts off in construction, starts off in December, and that's essentially enabling work and getting established, and then starting with more of a vengeance in late January and into February, and then carrying on through to early July. So the orange lines at the bottom are my understanding of the whitebait fishing season, the brown trout sea run, and the salmon fishing seasons. And so, as I said before, we've tried to be as sympathetic as we can with the timing of those activities. Yeah, thank you, Murray. So that's just a picture of the View Hill Quarry. So it's a good place to stop, I think. Thank you.
If I may, in terms of, as a resident of the Kaipoi North area, my query I just pulled up a map, was what roads were the trucks going to be using? Because Lees Road, if that's the way it's going to come in, and then to Clifford and then down to Ferry, is not really suitable for that many heavy trucks.
We're talking Lineside Road, coming in Lineside Road to Beach Road. Yeah. So what's the road that goes off to Oxford from Lineside Road? I just forget the name of it. Yep.
So you're probably turning left at the Fernside Road and then going down Fernside Road and then right in the plastics and out to Oxford Road and then back
That's
down.
it. That's it. That sounds right. Yeah.
So has any consideration been given to those smaller roads that may require some repair work after the trucks have been down, after the project's finished? Or is that left to the Waimak District Council as their regular maintenance?
Or even quantities, really. It sounds like 20,000 tonnes sounds like a lot, but there's nothing particularly unusual about it. We've for the Waimakariri Flood Protection Project that we've just completed, we carted something like 260,000 tonnes from Oxford to the Waimakariri River upstream of the motorway, on north side and south side, and placed that. So didn't have any drama around road maintenance. So no complaints from District Council. Well, you're absolutely right raising that, but it's perhaps part of the longer term solution. What we're proposing now will be compatible with anything we do in the future and will add value to anything we do in the future. But it'll take us, I think, quite some years and much bigger budget to do the sort of solution you're suggesting.
Long sort of things
Yeah.
need to be doing. Is what, yeah.
And you're absolutely right. It's the siltation of the inside of that bend and the migration of the channel across that's creating a lot of that pressure. But that's actually sort of 2 degrees of difficulty more complicated than what we're talking about now in terms of getting to that point. Could take us years and years and years to actually figure out what's the correct thing to do there and how to do it. And we'd still, we would still need to do what we're proposing to do now, you see. So you know, I'm not saying that longer term thinking doesn't need to happen. It will happen. But just keep in mind that everything we're proposing here, it will be compatible with anything else that's rolled out in future.
Well, I'm sure the fishermen love what you're doing, but yeah.
Well, they may not love us while we're there. That's right.
Yeah,
So
but by keeping it over there and redirecting it, you're ending up with these, you know, these massive holes for salmon anyway. So that's pretty cool. But I'm just thinking the longer term, because you just if you shoot it out, you've only got to see where the river ran, because it runs right over that grey bit, or didn't it? It ran right out there.
Yeah.
And it also ran over the bit that's got the wet, sharp end bit at some stage as well.
Yeah. And that's exactly why I started off the way I did start off in terms of, there is a bigger picture. It'd be quite a challenge to actually work out what needs to be done and have the confidence that that's going to be the answer and then get all the consents to do it.
Well, I don't think many people realise that this river is an amazing river. It used to, you know, at some stage flowed through the middle of Christchurch, flowed out through Lake Ellesmere. It's been all over the bloody show, that river.
Yeah.
And we're controlling it by keeping it within stock.
Robert, you're in the dark. I can't even see you.
Yeah. Well, that's great, but that opens up the wider question of the other issue that I have been hammering the table for the last 20 years, and that is and it should be the reintroduction of the central government's boat, soil and water, and the reformation of the Soil Conservation Rivers Control Council, which disappeared in the restructuring of local government in 1989/90, because vote, soil and water was a bipartisan thing. Didn't matter which government was in, red or blue, they still had a vote, soil and water. It went to NUASCO, and they allocated the money out to the catchment boards. And since the very early 90s, there has been no central government funding for regional councils, with the exception of the very, very bad floods. There has been a couple of them in or two. There was one up at Edgecombe, and I think a couple more, one on the west coast perhaps, have got a wee bit of funding. But I think all councils, regional councils throughout New Zealand and the zones, should be making noises about the reinstatement of central government funding for that. This project shouldn't have to rely on pre-election shovel-ready money. The vegetation clearance and the Ashley shouldn't have to rely on shovel-ready money. That's not a long-term solution. But very interesting presentation. But and thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Erin.
Sorry, I'm going to put my mum's safety hat on now. just having a look at the roads that you're proposing to use, so they're within 300 metres of Kaipoi North School, which is a very large school, and there are a lot of children that cross Smith and Beach Road between 8:30 and 9 and 3 and 3:30. So is there any consideration to the timing of the heavy vehicles to avoid the schools?
Well, there can be. These are issues we work through with once we've completed the tender process and got a preferred contractor. These are the sort of things we sit down with them and talk to them about. And so it's two trucks per hour sort of thing over quite a long period of time, and so it's yeah, yes, exactly, and yeah, understood. So a lot of it's about selecting the right contractor, and we certainly plan to do that. And he ensures that he has good drivers, and we all ensure that they're well briefed and they're following their instructions. And with other schools, I think with past works, we had a much lower speed limit past those schools than what we had elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's not directly past the school, but it is past the one of the main roads between the school and some of the zone that the children come from. So it would just be about maybe noting that in your discussion with the contractor.
And 3 and 3:30. Queenstown, they work right to the school. They do it themselves, no trucks.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Cam.
Can I just ask a question? You've got quite a deep hole there developing already. How much deeper does it need to get before it starts undermining the armouring there?
The rock armour that's there has been settling down into that hole. So as it's been topped up from the top, it's been sliding in from the bottom. It's part of this bigger picture that was mentioned before, but we're reasonably comfortable at the moment that it's in as good a state it can be in, other than going in with rock armour and filling the hole. And then we've got to have a discussion with the fishermen and ecologists around that. So it's we can't be 100% confident that it isn't going to undermine and cause trauma. That's why we're doing the work. It's all about risk management and trying to manage these uncertainties.
Thank you. I'm just interested in the wetlands, as you mentioned. You just said you were affecting them to a limited extent, and I wasn't quite sure to what extent you are affecting the wetlands, and is part of your consent.
Yes, we
have to look at those.
We'll be relying on our Waimakariri flood protection project resource consent, and also our code of practice guidelines for operating these sort of areas. So we've actually limited the extent of the rock work we're doing to try to avoid the worst overlaps on the one hand, but we will be working on the margins. So it's all about stopping sediment from getting in, working from the stop bank rather than working from rather than building a ramp for the wetland.
None of the actual rock work is actually going to go into the wetland. I mean, are you actually reducing?
No.
Not reducing the.
We're not reducing the size of any. Well, there are one or two areas there that people may define as wetlands that are very shallow and ephemeral, and if we're going to reduce the size of those, we'll create the same equivalent area further out. So we've got to recreate what we had before.
Yeah, I mean, just with with the new national policy statement, wetlands have become a very tricky thing to deal with, to touch at all. That might affect your existing consent. But
I won't comment on that because do you want to go there?
Yeah. Okay. There was the other thing just related to that was you've got having in the engineers a capable and I can't remember the phrase a good contractor, and I just wonder if that also ought to be in the criteria for the environmental side, that the contractor is capable and competent in the environmental area. It doesn't just drive his truck through the wetland by accident or something like that. It's just to raise the protection level there.
Oh, that's all part of our standard practice. It really is. Yeah, it really is.
Righto. Ian, thank you for a very thorough presentation. Thanks, Ian. Definitely hitting the right track. Oh. No, that's confidential. It's a bit like the water. It's like the watercress. Yeah. No. No. Righto. So we have a recommendation that the CWMS Waimakariri Zone Committee receive this update for its information. I think we've advised a wee bit on local community consultation needs. Can I have a mover in that direction, please? Erin, thank you. Seconder. Dave. All those in favour?
Just wondering, in relation to what Erin was talking about.
Yes.
Like, we'll just assume that Jared and Ian they're going to manage and inform the community of the truck movements and also estimate the number of trucks.
Assumptions can be dangerous.
Road control and community awareness of the project that's being carried out was, possibly a small thing in Guideware because or something like that.
Yep. Yep, it's a good assumption, right.
Thank you.
Carried. Thank you. Righto. Item 5, which is the ocean outfall compliance update for WDC. And who have we got here? Gavin, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm presenting the Eastern District's Sewer Scheme annual monitoring report for 2019 to 2020. Report was delivered to the UNR committee in September. That included the compliance report that council staff have put together. In summary, we complied with the ocean outfall consent on all our conditions in 2019 to 2020. Since that report went to UNR, we've received confirmation from the Regional Council that it has complied with all consent conditions. The plants are operating well. We're obviously undertaking maintenance every year to ensure that that continues. And the consent, it doesn't expire till 2038. And there's upgrades planned in the next 8 years between Woodend and the Rangiora wastewater treatment plants to ensure we continue to meet our consent conditions. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Caroline.
I just wondered, one of the Michael Bates, who comes and talks to our committee every month, brought up, crikey, it must be 3 years ago now, about diatom foam on the beach down at Pine Acres, and ECAN undertook to do some testing to determine what it was and whether it could have been related to the outfall. And I just wondered whether that ever got done, or I know there was difficulty in actually getting down there when there was some foam to collect.
We managed to get 2 samples. Yeah, there's 2 samples undertaken. And I've got my own viewpoints on this, but I'll just check with Sophie that. Yeah, you come up. And then I'll also add to that once Sophie's just given an update on.
Great. So there was research led by ESR a few years ago where they tried to look at the diatoms with basically the green algae. They didn't actually manage to get sea foam at all when they were trying. They took samples from the sand and from the water, but obviously were limited by not having foam. So, and just to remember, they didn't find any levels of concern of fecal bacteria, and we also do regular weekly sampling as part of our ocean outfall consent. We do water sampling, and we often, if ever, have had any problems with levels of bacteria. But what I have been doing last 2 summers is trying to get samples of foam, and I've managed to get both the water unit and myself managed to get 1 sample each. The problem, when I say there is often foam on the beach of a small quantity, but the volume you need to collect, which will bubble down to something they can actually measure for bacterial content, is they need to have at least sort of 100 mils that they can filter, but that's a large volume of foam. And so when you've actually managed to get that quantity, there have been levels higher than what you'd provided the water, higher than what you'd be able to swim in. But what I've said to in my reports, I think to the Utilities and Roading Committee, or was it Land and Water? Was it you and I? Both, okay. So in reports to Council at least, what I think is happening in the sea foam is that you've got it sitting on the beach in warm conditions, because often in summertime that this foam's being produced, and it's like a greenhouse effect where you've got nutrients and heat, and you do have bacteria multiplying with nutrients. And it might be a phenomenon that you see anywhere around the world, irrespective of whether you have an ocean outflow or not, that you do get higher bacterial numbers. The other process, apart from bacterial replication, is there's evidence that bubbles in the sea naturally can pick up the bacteria that are in the water and glue them together in bubble scavenging. And that's, so with both those processes combined, I think what the next step, that's probably beyond what our council could do, is sea foam a bacterial source wherever you happen to be around the world. So it's getting to the stage where that's not something our council can pursue, but it's something I've been meaning to talk to the University of Canterbury to see if there's any student who'd be interested to carry on that study.
So could I just add to that is, so from the wastewater treatment plants, our discharges out to sea, if you look in the monitoring report, our bug numbers are always far below the consent limits. And interestingly, although I wouldn't like to use as a defence, is you look at what comes out of the Waimakariri River that we also sample, we're substantially below those numbers. In addition to that, the ocean outfall, the design of it is that the low numbers we send out, as soon as it exits the outfall, it's diluted by 75 times within a few metres, and then as it goes further, it's diluted further. Every 5 years, we'll undertake a study which is known as a benthic study, where we engage NEWA to go and take samples of the seabed, and they've been taking those samples prior to the ocean outfall being put in place. So that's to ensure that we monitor that we're not changing the environment. And to date, there's been nothing's been picked up. So the next one's in 2022 in March. So from what we believe we're putting very low bug numbers out to sea, and they've been diluted. My personal opinion is that the ocean outfall is not related to the foam, but obviously ideally would get some further scientific backing on that.
I guess we should pass that on to Michael at some point in time, shouldn't we?
Yeah, it's a shame he's not here to hear that, Kevin. Yep. Correct. Yes. Yep. So
I have been in contact with the reports they have gone to our WDC committees. They have been circulated to Michael Bate.
thanks, Gavin. I had a couple of things I just wanted to touch on, but you've covered them already with your consent going out to 2038. So what is the predicted population growth of this district? About another 20,000 by then. You're comfortable you can accommodate that?
Yeah, in the last 18 months we've done 2 studies, one on hydraulic capacity and the other one on treatment capacity. Obviously the question raises around what those consent conditions will be in 2038. Yeah. It's a changing environment at the moment. In terms of, there's been a focus put on 3 waters, and one of the key focuses will no doubt be wastewater coming up in the future.
Cam.
Sorry, perhaps more of a scientific question, just so I can understand the graphs. A lot of the fecal coliform and E. coli graphs, it sort of bounces along the bottom most of the time, and then it'll just have an astronomical spike every so often. What's going on there? Why is there such big swings in that reading?
So that's certainly the fecals have been reasonably stable. We do get what we probably refer to as an outlier, but excuse my pronunciation on this, but the not the E. coli but the enterococci, they have historically, particularly around March, February, we have had some random spikes in those numbers, and over the last I think 6 years, council has engaged ESR and a consultant to look into that. So it's within our consent limits to have the odd spikes, but obviously we're not happy about it. We believe it's that one particular bug. We believe it's coming from within the pipe itself. We have what we call a biofilm. So at this stage, we've been into our pipes just recently, and we've seen the biofilms quite thick. So we believe that essentially there might be some bug counts sloughing off those walls in that March period when that water temperature changes. So as when the water temperature changes, something's happening inside there. So what we're undertaking in the next 6 months is to clean all the pipe lines, and we'll do to get that biofilm off. And then going forward, we'll have a regular flushing program to make sure that biofilm doesn't build up. Obviously, when we clean that off, we'll be sending that back to the treatment plant, not sending that out to sea. Otherwise, it'll be picked up in the benthic survey, no doubt. So that's our theory. But with those high counts, we still comply. We're allowed 6 high counts a year, but obviously we just don't like to have those occurring.
Cam, are you looking for the job to clean out those pipes, or you're... So, yeah, Gavin, just coming back, so both Woodend and Kaipoi rely on wetlands for a filtering sort of process. Do you need to expand those areas as our population grows over the next 20 years?
Expand the wetlands? No, the main emphasis on increasing treatment has been through aeration basins. Essentially, it's a large basin pond that we have aerators installed to knock down the loads coming into the plant. The wetlands, the planted wetlands, I refer to them probably more polishing. Obviously there for the cultural reasons, and they do provide a minor treatment, but we have UV in front of those. So, in terms of reducing bug counts, we don't rely on them. So we wouldn't need to expand them to meet our treatment requirements going forward.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
Alrighty. That was item 5 that we'll come back to it. So I have a motion that we receive this update for its information and with consideration to its priorities and community engagement. Do I have a mover? Thank you. Caroline, seconder. Wendy, thank you. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Murray, you have the chair.
Thank you, Michael. The first item has been custom for some time, proposed plan change 7. Most of the summary there is consistent with previous months. The critical thing that most people will be aware of is that the hearing has begun on the 28th of September and carries on through over 5 weeks, not consecutive weeks, through to the 4th of December. So that process is underway now, and I don't know if there's any questions or that anyone would like to ask. I think it can be viewed because it's on YouTube. Yep, with the panel chair Dave Shepherd being locked down in Melbourne. It needs to be zoomed, so it's actually viewable day by day on YouTube, as David said. So that gives an opportunity for people to catch up and get a sense of what the submission process is like, or the hearings process is like. And I've included the links, which will also give you access to information and those links as well. The next item we've got is the regional committee, and that's coming up next Tuesday, Caroline, is that correct? So I guess we don't really have anything to update, but I'll hand it over to you.
No agenda yet, so I'm not sure what will be coming up. Hopefully we'll have a bit of direction perhaps on where the regional committee's heading in terms of its function. Yeah, but if anyone's got anything they want brought up, just sing out.
I believe that's right in terms of just from what I've heard around the office. Yeah, that's part of what that session will feed back to you as committee members as kind of options around what the regional committee might look like in the future, potentially. So there's a bit of a gap in the meeting papers, which was really around we would normally have the Land and Water Committee there, but we're slightly out of sync with the way those meetings go. And given that's, is it next week, Sandra, or later this week? This week. So we, because that committee hasn't seen what it's about to receive at the time that we put these papers out, we removed it. So we can provide that for the next meeting in November. So that makes item 3 an update on the committee's working groups. So I can perhaps hand over to Cam and Judith and Carolyn just to, they've provided a summary update in the papers, but perhaps Cam, if I hand it over to you, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add or any questions that there may be for you.
No, I've probably got nothing to add unless there's any questions.
Thank you. Can you outline what the planning and research into this Silver Stream wetland project involves, and also can you explain what a land care group is and how it differs from any other group? Thank you.
Sure. So I guess start with the Silver Stream wetland project. So that was, I guess, one of the key projects that the Land Care Group was looking at. Targeted projects for improving water quality, particularly from a farming perspective or land care perspective. We've had a meeting, this was the meeting that was referred to, that was Friday 2 weeks ago in Kaipoi, really discussing if we were to put targeted approaches around the headwaters of Silver Stream, what might that look like? And really we came up with a lot more questions around the science that might be required for that, particularly if you're looking at wetland construction, targeted stream augmentation, given the unique nature of Silver Stream that essentially it doesn't have defined spring heads, that really the whole thing is a spring head for probably kilometres. So our discussion centred around what science is known, what is unknown, where we might pick up further research and advice around what the options might be to fix the water quality, particularly in those headwaters where the nitrates are the highest. So that's where the research component was coming in from there. So there's quite a long list of options and ideas that we came up with in the meeting that we'll plug away at before we start looking at any potential concepts there. Does that satisfy that question?
Oh, I just wondered what sort of time frame you're looking at and who was doing the
Yep, sure.
Who was doing all this research and knocking around the...
So at the moment it's sitting with the Land Care Group as a subgroup of the Zone Committee, so that's with ECAN support. I guess it's envisaged that if the Land Care Group becomes what we want it to be, which is more community farmer driven, a large scale catchment group, I guess you call it, that eventually once the group is formed in a more formal sense, that group would pick up that research and any projects that might come from that with the support of the Zone Committee and ECAN. But for now, given the timing, mostly with PC7 rolling through, we haven't been able to formalise any Land Care Group. That'll happen once PC7 is rolled through. That at the moment this is still sitting within the Zone Committee. In terms of timeframes, there really isn't any. It was quite a long list of research and analysis that needed to happen first, so we really can't give any indications on timeframes yet. And the other part, just around the Land Care Group itself, I'm learning very quickly what the various terminology means. So I understood a Land Care Group to be quite extensive in terms of its catchment, that it I thought of catchment groups as being quite a defined group of people around a specific water body, and a land care group being more extensive across multiple water bodies. Apparently that's, talking to Joe Buckner, is the other way around, that land care groups are much smaller. So whether that name remains, I'm not too sure. Essentially it is around a large-scale catchment group that embodies the majority of the zone, that is driven by the landowners or the various stakeholder groups rather than by council or by the zone committee. So it's in conceptual stage. Whether it stays as a land care group, it might be a next iteration of the next generation farmers group. It might be, I know OTOP are looking at amalgamating a lot of their catchment groups in their zone. Whether this ends up being something similar to that, we're still unsure, and it probably won't have more direction until we've had our, what do they call it, a forum, that's right, where essentially we chuck everyone in the room and say, look, we all understand what the issue is, what do we want this to look like, where's the money going to come from, who's going to drive it, and that is all going to be post PC7, because all those groups are currently involved in submissions, and it's probably dangerous for us to be discussing too much given that process is going on. So hopefully that'll be done, well, assuming the hearings finish on time, will be by the end of, sort of April, May. We've got a forum scheduled hopefully for November, but that'll depend on whether everyone can make it at that time.
If there's no other questions of Cam, I can hand over to Judith for Biodiversity Working Group.
Okay. Well, we seem to be out of kilter between meetings and this meeting. I think we might address that next time. So, as it says in the agenda, we were going to meet. We did meet on just last Thursday with Peter Joyce and Letitia Lum to discuss the idea that Te Ara Kakariki Trust, well, to learn about Te Ara Kakariki Trust, the work they do, how they're funded, etc. And they work in Selwyn to plant trees, will provide and plant trees through volunteers on private and public land. And we were looking to talk to whether or how something like that might work in Waimakariri district. We've discussed that again today in the workshop prior to this meeting. And I think really the main decision is we'll just keep talking to the trust about how it might work here, and perhaps talk to some individuals and to Waimakariri District Council as to how a biodiversity community trust might work in this district. I don't know if any of the other members of the committee have anything to say. Is that summary to summarise it? Thank you.
Thanks, Judith. And Carolyn, you've provided just that quick update that the next Saltwater Creek catchments are tomorrow.
Yep, so hopefully by the end of tomorrow night we'll know what our name is actually going to be. That's sort of like the interim name. I know, yeah, so we're just sort of doing very preliminary things like deciding on a name.
Land care could be quite popular.
Working out a vision or some goals, looking at our structure and seeing if there's interest in what projects are out there, like for fencing and riparian planting, whether we can pull anything together in terms of going for some funding. And what activities that the group are interested in pursuing, areas of interest. We've had an offer already from Ray Onier, who own Ashley Forest, for the catchment group to go up and have a field day up in the forest early next year to see what their environmental management involves and how it could be impacting the catchment. And one of the local lifestylers has been out in his digger. I don't quite know what he's been doing, but he's been fiddling around with his swales and doing some pretty cool things, he reckons. So he's happy to have everyone over to see what he's doing as well. So yeah, so it's really cool the way things are just sort of, starting to, even at this early stage, it feels like it's getting a bit of momentum, and it'll be interesting to see if we get a similar turnout tomorrow as we had at the first one. Fingers crossed. Yeah, it might be. Yeah, and Joe.
Thanks, Carolyn. Yeah, I think it is great that you're getting that quiet sort of momentum just within the group itself. So yeah, I hope that goes well tomorrow. If there's no other questions around that, well, we can move on to the next one, which is communications and engagement. And Angus has provided in the papers a link to the key article that's emerged in the last between meetings, and that was around some support of a project associated with Next Generation Farming Trust. So I don't know if there's any questions on that, or if Angus, if there's anything else you'd like to raise at this point. Any other breaking news, if I can?
No, breaking news won't surprise anyone. I've been mainly looking at the engagement plan for the next item. A lot of strands to that, a lot of people involved in it, obviously. And we need to get our messaging lined up on the website and elsewhere. A lot of presentations by council and others. So, a lot.
Thanks, Angus. That's probably quite a good update relative to the next item as well, really. The links that are in there, I think, a bit like PC7, will be consistent links that I'll provide each month because, and Angus will, I'm sure, reinforce that, particularly to the ECAN site, that's where information will continue to be updated, Angus, isn't it? So that's the link to use in an ongoing way. Are there any questions around that either of those?
Yeah, please. In number 5, the committee will receive briefings on this package in due course. And I just wonder if we could actually get something sooner rather than later, given there's stuff already on site. I've already been at a Zoom workshop with an ECAN presenter who presented what she could say at the time as an update, and we could actually discuss what is a wetland, when is a ditch not a drain, and things like that. And I just wonder if we could have some intermediate or interim briefing sooner rather than later.
And Angus might want to, I don't know if he wants to speak to that, but certainly after I submitted the papers at the end of the week, we saw the first sort of, I guess, an outline of an approach in terms of getting something to all of the zone committees by way of a briefing. So it arrived after these papers were out. But as Angus has alluded to, a lot of work's going on, certainly to, I guess, firm up positions. One of the other things that's come through when I scuttled off across the building to follow up on that was that, and certainly it's right to put the plural around briefings because, and as you've intimated, Judith, getting something in the near future, but it certainly won't be in any way a definitive or final briefing. There's so much to digest and get our collective head round that there'll be multiple briefings over time, I think, for committees.
One of the useful things about this Zoom meeting was, I think the ECAN person said it was interesting or useful, was that we asked questions that she hadn't thought about, or, I guess the FAQs are going to start popping up, but we were ecologists and we were asking questions about interpretation of certain terms from an ecological perspective as to planners. And I think, again, from a community farming perspective, we might be able to ask some questions of a person giving a briefing that they can answer and take forward.
From my understanding, and we probably with the Fed's hat on have asked for the same thing around briefings, and I can only speak from what I've heard. This is not from an ECAM perspective, but that they're still trying to work through every summary we've received, and I think every summary they've given has been more a summary of the documents, the MPS and NES itself, rather than how it will apply in Canterbury. So we're getting questions thick and fast as to what do I do in my scenario where I've got this and that, and then council saying I've got to do one thing and the MPS is saying I've got to do another, and I think it's just, there's a lot of scenarios to work through, but the sooner we can get some answers, definitely the better, because there's a lot of questions out there,
This probably isn't a question you can answer, Angus, or not at this point in time. I just wondered if ECAN had given much thought to how they were going to engage with the community, because the MPS specifically states, or in the FPP process, which is the freshwater planning process, I think I got that right, that it's community and local runanga that decide how the MPS applies within your region. And I haven't heard any mention from anyone within ECAN that's given any briefings about community engagement thus far.
Certainly part of the engagement plan. The runanga part of it is big, Te Mana Otawai, obviously. So we're starting to get our heads around that. And then we're breaking it down into sector groups, including the wider community. I think it's fair to say that will probably come a little bit later, because the demands, as Cam said, are coming through thick and fast from those on the ground, farmers and others, and groups like yourselves, zone committees. So it's a lot to bite off, and yeah, it's not just going to be ECAN either. I mean, there's a lot of industry groups that are doing great work, and we've already spoken to Dairy NZ and others about how we can work together with them to get good FAQs out there, and also some alignment if we can manage that. So yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, I guess where my concern's coming from is that more emphasis is being given to the runanga proportion of it, but the sentence says community and runanga. It doesn't put one before, well, the sentence puts community before runanga, but it won't be putting runanga's wants above the community. So I think that the balance hasn't been struck yet in the plan that's been put in place thus far.
Early days, and I'll certainly take that back. It's not a conversation I've heard too much so far, but again, early days.
So with yeah, that's probably just my take on it. Yeah, I feel that we are part of the community, and we probably align strongly with the runanga and those things.
Yes. And I guess my point is that for 10 years under the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, the Zone Committee has been the representative of the community on water management in the region, across the region in this district. And so we're set up to bring the community and runanga together. And I think we should be well up the list of people getting a briefing.
We have a project team meeting tomorrow, so I can certainly take that along to them. Very timely.
Thank you, folks. I think that is timely. That's probably where the timeliness ends in the updates. I've just, in terms of the Zone Committee review, Sophie and Kate have just left. You will recall at the last meeting, which was quite a juggernaut of a meeting and 2 workshops and a follow-up meeting on the day. The follow-up meeting at the end of this meeting a month ago was just an opportunity for to look at the Zone Committee's feedback on the Zone Committee review with representatives from the District Council, alongside Arapata and John from a runanga perspective, and Michael and Cam there to represent the committee as well, just to review the feedback and get any further sort of thoughts, and by and large an affirmation, I think, of the points that the committee raised. So in noting those discussion points, I've fed that through to Sophie as a basis for firming up what will go to the council in terms of shaping up the letter of shared priority. So I think that'll be done in the coming month and probably go to the District Council in November. So Waimakariri, as it's regularly seen region-wide, is sort of leading the way in which this has sort of been assimilated and picked up by the council in terms of coming up with a draft of a letter of shared priorities alongside what Environment Canterbury's provided to each of the other 10 water zones as well. So yeah, I think that's basically just why I just did a quick one-line update. It's basically on the back of the last month's meeting. It's been fed through to firm up that paper, which I guess by and large the council's already seen. So if there's any questions around that. The other bit of timing that's not so great, action points from the previous zone committee meetings, I followed up by way of dress rehearsal with Adrian at Torval and Dean of how we would respond to these questions. And the only thing missing really is Adrian, who who was following up on these points. So look, I'll endeavour just to quickly touch on these because we have got, and in fact Tim, who's also not here, has done a wee bit of follow up in terms of like the LAWA information and getting that updated. So he's sent something through, whether I fumble my way through or whether we circulate it or yeah. So the other items that we just touched on there, I think Adrian, like we've noted another point today in terms of Adrian coming back to this committee by way of a report on the monitoring that's being done. So I think in and around the Kaipoi River, there's a fairly substantive briefing there that we can do, that Adrian can provide based on those action points. So obviously they were noted as recommendations from this committee at the last meeting. So apologies for Adrian not being here. I've been checking my phone to see if, but yeah, as of late last week he was working on this. So I'm not exactly sure where he is and hope he's okay.
Just a point on that.
Yep.
Well, when you find them, can we have, if it's able to be emailed, can we all have an email of what he was going to present, or can we have an update about when he's going to present it? Can I just mention something else under that that action point, number 7? I had a look at the LAWA website because the annual report on rivers has come out for 1920 with no improvement over the last 10 years as being the lead-in paragraph that went nationwide. But what I wanted to ask about, particularly for our patch, I looked at the rivers that were being monitored. There's sizable gaps in the data. There's a new one in there, Wilson Drain. Now, is Wilson Drain Lineside Road drain?
It's going into the Waimakariri, so
It's called Wilson's.
It's not. Yes, it's. So it's new. It's got on it. It's a new one, and I just wondered whether he can, because no one was left here from, like Jared's gone as well, who perhaps might be able to update. That's Otukokino.
Yeah, that's it.
But Wilson's, I thought, came from the. Is it Lineside Road drain? Because I thought they were going to start. You reckon it's over that side? Okay. I was going to ask about that, but the other thing that is clear to me is the gaps in the data. Someone needs to look at it. I mean, there's water quality and there's ecological readings need to be brought to this committee or have a report, because part and parcel of those zipper recommendations is updating on monitoring, and if there's still gaps, they need to be addressed. For a start, a simple one which gets up my nose all the time is the fact that we call the Kaipoi River upstream of 3 streams, Silver Stream, and it is still referred to as Kaipoi River upstream. Now, is it relatively simple to just put brackets Silver Stream? Because there is a distinct change. Kaipoi River main stem, it doesn't get any water quality. It only gets it only gets the fecals over the swimming period. Now that's another issue that clearly Adrian has been asked to look at, which was the substance of the discussion last time. So I'd like to see that if our input into what goes on the LAWA website is through ECAN, obviously supplying details, can we have some sort of briefing about, I'm particularly concerned about Silver Stream, Kaipoi River and the tributary streams that go into the Kaipoi. So can you note that and see if we can have a bit of a discussion whenever Adrian reappears from wherever Adrian
Yeah, no,
has
that's and I guess that it falls into line with the zipper as well. I mean, we literally had a recommendation around that, didn't we, in terms of the naming of the upper and the lower. So yeah, look, I think that does sound like something we can introduce into the site. So we'll note that, Sandra. Thank you.
So, Murray, so who in ECAN is sort of on point there?
Certainly, having followed up since the last meeting with both Adrian and Tim, they're looking at that, and they were and have followed up with the NIWA folks in terms of those two sites, and they continue to do so just to make sure that they are updated. So I think that that forms a basis upon which what Sandra's just asked, like, can we also update some of the way in which the data is presented or waterways are labelled, should be something that ECAN can. So between Angus and I, as two people in the room here that are associated with this committee and engagement around this, I think that is public information. That's something we can follow up on. But we'll obviously do it with our science colleagues, given it's their responsibility as well.
Sorry, just following on from Sandra's comments, she'd also sent an email in reply to one of Judith's emails around trying to get a localised version of that annual report, which I thought would actually be quite useful to see. Is that something we are able to check to see if that's an easy way of collecting that information on a district basis?
In terms of from the Lawa?
Yeah, so the Lawa report's got a nationalised whole lot of bar graphs that show on a national scale how water quality is shifting across a number of metrics. Just wondering if they've got the statistical ability to do that in the background, whether we can, or we can, we'll look at doing something like that for each of the zones on an annual basis, if it's just a mathematical thing.
Again, I think that's a...
You can do them all individually, but it's a pain in the arse having to do it. Yeah. You can look them up one by one, but it'd be great to see overall, are we improving?
Yeah, look, that seems a valid, and it would make it a useful resource for each, really not just for here,
part
but
of
for
our annual report for the zone committee to show.
Yeah, so, and Tim, yes, absolutely. No, look, I'll follow up with, I think Tim's probably done some work looking at that aspect, but it is again, it could be just a structural thing in terms of how they can group and collate. So, no, a valid point for us to follow up on.
To our next meeting would be really welcome. Thank you.
Take that as noted. Following through the other action points from the previous meeting, there was a briefing to be arranged by the District Council around the natural hazards and hydrodynamic modelling. And following up with Sophie on that, we identified, because we thought the November meeting would be a good opportunity to do that, just with the fact that that's underway. So we've got that effectively onto the agenda for November. And the final update point there around the tree removal at the Rakahuri Regional Park near Rangiora. David Owen had provided that statement for us, which is included, just giving a follow-up, from the original situation in terms of what's been done since then. So I don't know if there's any further questions around that.
Just ask Councillor Stewart if the plan, the recreational master plan, has the mayor's support. Has that come to council at all yet? No. Okay. Thank you. So it's.
Yeah, I think David saw that, even if linking it into the Braided River revival thing, I think that master plan is seen as something which is a really good way for Environment Canterbury and the District Council to work together on that regional park area. So I guess it's a way of picking up what's happened with the tree felling and turning it into something positive on a slightly larger scale as well, as a recreation and amenity area for Rangiora. Okay, that's
Lovely. Thank you, Murray. We will follow up on some of those points next month, perhaps.
indeed. Yeah, well, they're more
Cool.
than points. Yeah, they are reports.
Righty, I have a recommendation that we receive these updates for its information and with reference to the committee's 2020-2021 work programme and engagement priorities. Can I have a mover, please? Thank you, Judith. Seconder, David. Thank you. All those in favour? Lovely. Against? Carried. Item 5, confirmation of the minutes of the previous Waimakariri Water Zone Committee meeting, which was held on September the 7th, 2020. And that they are a true and accurate record. Can I have a mover, please? David, seconder. Judith, thank you. All those in favour? Against? Excellent. Carried. Matters arising.
Sorry, we skipped the discussion. And
No.
for that.
Matters arising. We're on to
No,
that.
it's not a matter arising. It's actually a correction to the minutes. Sorry. Oh, it's a question about the minutes. Sorry.
Yes, go.
And I think you presumably listen to a recording of this, do you, to type it? Okay, so I was just going to question what I said, but you probably got a better record than I did. Page 77, biological monitoring on the banks of the Kaiapoi River. I actually thought I said the whole of the Kaiapoi River, but if you used a recording, I'll pass on that. Thank you. Just forget it.
That's all right. Yep. Would you?
It is actually the banks, but
if that's what I said, that's the record. That's fine.
Any other matters there, folks? Corker. I've got one just coming back to page 5. When we had a bit of a roundabout in terms of which was new territory and plan change 7. So owing to the fact I had a gap in my school holiday program, I went to the hearings first day, which after I left at the end of it, I thought maybe I should have gone mountain biking for my children. But anyway, the first piece of evidence that was presented by ECAN was their legal submission. It's quite important. You'll have a look at it if you haven't already. Basically, it's saying this plan change must give effect to the freshwater package. So that's a game changer for us and our community. So just have a look at that when you get a minute. But that's the basis the hearing's proceeding on. So yeah, that was the one thing I picked up on. So must give effect is quite strong terminology. Also later on in the week I did hear submissions from Tim at Carlton Farms, which I thought was well presented. Dairy NZ gave a very good presentation that effectively stood behind a lot of PC7 to almost 2040 in their estimation. So there was a lot of interesting comment that, you know, knowing the background, it is worthwhile if you get time to go along and just sit in the background. Sometimes you've got to sit on your hands and not try and put your hand up and make comment, but you're hearing both sides of the story, and it's the right forum for it. Well, that's true. You did. Yeah. Rightio. Do we have any other matters arising?
Well, I have quite a bit of question about the stuff that we mentioned last time, particularly on page 77, and I guess I was expecting it would all be coming with Adrian and perhaps Tim's update. So I'll park it, but concerned about all the things that we discussed, and I expected it would be addressed in a report. So really keen that that does happen, that we get a report on this. Being another update, Land and Water Committee on Thursday will be dealing with our own internal report on the Kaipo River, which pulls out a lot of stuff that's here.
Nothing else? Excellent. Item 6, general business. Everybody's looking like they've had enough. Nothing there? Corker. If there is no one who has any pressing general business, Mr. Rubin, could you honour us with a karakia just to close the meeting?
Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou āriki a Hukaraiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhina tahitanga, ki te wairua rapu, ake, amene. Tea time.
Kia ora, thank you. Righto, next meeting, folks, is on the 2nd of November. Can we have it here? Do we have it somewhere else?
Where would you like?
Kaiapoi? Righto. That would be most appropriate. If we could have it at the Ruataniwha Centre in Kaiapoi, and if you could check with that there, we would be quite excited about that, because you can look across the river to the Port and Eagle. Righto, thanks very much, folks.